Hello and good morning. I'm Simon Miller. I'm the Director of Policy Communications and Strategy here at Cifas, and welcome to the 6-month update of Fraudscape. Fraudscape is our most significant data release of the year, and the 6-month update covering the first half of 2025 is a really important complement to the overall report. I'm just going to say a few words about how today's session will run before I hand over to our Chief Operating Officer, Richard Friedman. So today's session will consist of an overview from Richard, who we'll hear from shortly, covering the wider fraud landscape, some of the key challenges and trends within it. We will then move to some detailed coverage of the actual findings of what our members have filed to our national fraud database in the first 6 months of the year. We'll then move to a curated Q&A covering some of the key trends and digging into some of those details a little more before opening up to a Q&A more widely. We reckon that today's session will last for about 45 to 50 minutes. We are hugely grateful for the numbers of you who have made the time to join us. It just demonstrates how worthwhile this exercise is. But without any more ado, let me pass on to Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this launch webinar for the 6-month update to our 2025 Fraudscape report. And as Simon said, thank you for taking the time to join us for this session. If you haven't had an opportunity to read the report yet, you can access it through the link that the team are going to be sharing in the chat. And I'd like to start by introducing our speakers that make up today's panel. Duncan McClellan, Senior Intelligence Analyst here at Cifas. Stephen Dalton, our Director of Intelligence, and you've already met Simon Miller, our Director of Policy, Strategy and Communications. In a moment, our panel will dive into the key statistics and data from our latest report, as well as discussing and debating the wider themes raised and what they mean for our collective efforts to tackle fraud and fraudsters, and how we can all keep organisations and business safe from fraud. But first, I'd like to take a moment to set the scene as we see it. Our Fraudscape report covers the first 6 months of 2025 and provides a detailed overview and analysis of the fraud risk data filed by our members to our fraud risk databases. And it presents that fraud risk data together with intelligence provided by Cifas members, partners, and law enforcement. And together, the insight from these different sources provides a compelling account of the challenges and threats facing consumers, organisations, and businesses that we in the fraud prevention community work so hard to protect. Our report also highlights the emerging threat vectors, which will require focus and dedication to address. Fraudscape has become one of the UK's key fraud data releases, influencing policy and shaping the responsive industry to the fraud threat. You'll no doubt be aware of the recent ONS crime survey figures released a couple of weeks ago. These point to fraud surging. The headlines from our latest Fraudscape update are no different. Together, they make for grim reading. The data from the first 6 months of the year suggests that a record number of cases will be filed to our national fraud database in 2025. And this is particularly noteworthy as the figures for 2024 were the highest on record. A key driver for these increases appears to be the rapid technological change and the easy availability of AI services and fraud toolkits. Beyond technology, geopolitical uncertainty and, for some, continued pressures from their cost of living have also provided rich opportunities for criminals to exploit. These issues have had a direct impact on the data filed by organisations to the Cifas National Fraud Database. And these same circumstances may also, sadly, provide incentive for those who may be struggling financially to commit fraud to bolster their income. The Fraudscape data demonstrates the extent to which fraud is not just industrialised, but digitised. The services that enable us to stay connected also expose us to criminals. Fully 80% of all scams are now digitally enabled, with fraudsters moving with ease between platforms, services, and technologies. The threat from fraud is also global and organized, with criminal gangs mimicking the size and structures of large corporations. And AI is not just transforming our ability to identify fraud, it's also transforming the capability of fraudsters to operate at scale, harvesting data quickly on targets, producing near-perfect fake documents in seconds, enabling attacks on networks at an entirely new scale, and through the use of deepfakes and AI-generated images and voices, impersonating people, both consumers and authority figures, to steal their data and their savings. It's made the threat from fraud not only more compelling and difficult to detect, but much more urgent to us all. And whilst I've talked a lot about the scale of the threat, I want to end on a more positive note. We are building a fraud fighting community that is global in scope and united in our commitment to strengthen our defences, take the fight to the criminals, and turn the tide on fraud. Cifas alone has helped its members prevent over £2.1 billion in fraud losses over the last year. But we know there is still more to do. It's only through working together, specifically through the sharing of data and intelligence, that we will beat the criminals. Cifas exists for this very purpose. Our latest Fraudscape report makes clear the progress that's being made, but also the scale of the challenge that faces us all. So thank you once again for joining us this morning, and we really want you to engage with the conversation. So please make sure you ask your questions using the Zoom question functionality. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Duncan McClellan to provide an overview of the key information from our report. Duncan.
Thanks, Richard. Much appreciated. Great. So I'll kick off with a couple of the key insights from our Fraudscape report. As Richard kindly mentioned, this is a 6-month update, and obviously we still provide our annual report as well. But it essentially looks at the filing trends to the NFD. We pick up on any insights from member reporting from the likes of our OFIG events and general kind of horizon scanning across the piece. So in terms of the National Fraud Database, we are looking at 217,000 cases filed. That is actually a 1% rise, a modest rise, but really key to make a point around this being another record number of cases throughout this actual period. And it actually follows unprecedented levels that we saw in the full year of 2024 compared to 2023. And as Richard pointed out, it does talk to the rise we've seen around the ONS reporting 33% higher, and I think that's the highest since 2017 as well. So digging into our fraud categories, the first up is identity fraud, 118,000 cases, actually down 7%, but it still does account for 55% of cases to the NFD. We do think that's actually a bit of a shift because we've seen a big shift towards account takeover for the telecommunications sector. So rather than that being a true decline on ID fraud, we think it's shifted over to facility takeover, which actually saw a 73% rise specifically against mobile phones, which I believe my colleagues will probably expand on shortly. But in terms of ID fraud, we did see key rises within gambling accounts, personal credit cards, insurance products, and concerningly, a rise in impersonations for driving licenses as well. And as Richard alluded to, of course, AI being a key threat, reporting by members, higher quality documents and synthetic identities as well being a key concern. Next up, misuse of facility, we had around 51,000 cases. That's actually a 35% rise. And actually represents the largest real-term volume increase we've seen across all of our case types. I believe it's up around 13,000 cases. And actually that puts misuse of facility at number 2 in terms of our case types, replacing facility takeover. I don't believe we've seen that for several years now. And the uplift around misuse of facilities, particularly against the bank account sector, where we saw another additional 12,500 cases. A big chunk of that relating to sort of unexplained conduct on accounts and funds being received, which cannot be accounted for in terms of fraud. In misuse of facility, we also saw a rise in evasion of payment, and that talks to member reporting around sort of individuals applying for products and services where there's no intention to actually pay the funds back. Which neatly brings us to money mules. So 16,000 cases, that's actually a 17% decline, but it's worth noting that it still accounts for 43% of filings within the bank account sector. It's worth expanding on the fact that we've actually introduced a new money mule filing reason. So we're certainly in a bit of a transitionary period at the moment in terms of mule reporting, which my colleagues will probably expand on as well. But useful, really handy around the new filing reason because it really has put a spotlight on a range of different products that are now being targeted for muling. So we can see we've actually seen an uplift against credit cards, prepaid cards, money transfer accounts as well. So certainly one to monitor for the rest of the year in terms of looking at all the other products that can be targeted for money mule purposes. Then we're over to facility takeover. So pretty much stayed steady, a 1% increase, but we've still had 38,000 cases filed to the NFD. As mentioned, it's been replaced by misuse of facility, but facility takeover still accounts for nearly a fifth of all cases filed to the database. Of note, we've seen yet another surge in terms of telecommunication filings, particularly in relation to mobile dealer fraud, which my colleagues will probably expand on. A really interesting MO, eye-watering volumes, and we reckon we've had around 19,000 cases of this specific tactic in 2025 so far. So that's a big contributor to the NFD and could impact where we go for the end of the year in terms of final numbers. Outside of telecommunications, facility takeover heavily focused on online retail, plastic cards, and of course bank accounts as well. And then we're on to false applications. So that's actually a 25% decrease. We've still had around 8,500 cases reported. This decrease is actually contrary to the 10% rise we saw in 2024, mainly due to a reduction in the insurance sector. We do think stricter controls implemented by members will be a bit of a driver behind this. But ultimately, still a large focus in terms of false applications within the insurance sector, bank account sector, which combined, they account for 64% of cases within this category. And obviously, the general sort of growth and social acceptance of first-party fraud. We know around half of individuals that Cifas has previously surveyed believe this to be sort of an acceptable type of fraud. So particularly around falsifying CVs, returns fraud, that kind of thing. So certainly a key risk for the rest of the year. And then lastly, in terms of insider threat, so filings to our insider threat database, they're actually up 32%. So we've had 160 cases filed within this 6-month period. A large bulk of these incidents are relating to our key sort of categories, which have been enduring threat for a while, which is dishonest action and fraudulent employment applications unsuccessful. Unsuccessful being the positive bit there. So the actual rise is actually focused on those categories, but of interest is the actual range of behaviours within dishonest action has actually increased. I think we've had over 20 different categories of dishonest action filed in this period, which is much higher than last year. So in addition to the usual falsifying timesheets, etc., and expenses, we've seen an uptick around theft of high value equipment, abuse of company time, and manipulation of bonuses and reward schemes offered by the institutions themselves. Obviously, showing the sort of range of scenarios which individuals can use to supplement their income, with cost of living being a bit of a driver. General sort of concerns around insider threat, definitely around polygamous working, reference houses, but one for the guys to expand upon. So that was all the sort of categories for the rest of the year. Obviously, going to be focused on AI, I'm sure, but particularly if we continue to see that surge in telco activity, I suspect that'll be the tipping point for getting another record number of filings to the NFD by the end of the year. So certainly one to watch out for. And that's all the key categories. I'll hand over back to the guys.
Duncan, thank you so much for that. And just a reminder to people that if you do have questions, please add them into the Q&A function in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So, Stephen, I think you're going to join me now, aren't you? And we're going to tease through some of the key themes, key details that Duncan has alluded to in a little more detail. But I think the starting point for all of us is that reminder that our figures don't exist in a vacuum, do they? They're part of a much broader picture, both of data on the fraud landscape, but also political regulatory activity, as also our own lived experiences. And I think what our data is saying that for the second year on the row, this is a bumpy year for fraud, and that's in line with recent data from the ONS, which reported that fraud is now a staggering 41 to 43% of all crime, a 19% uplift on previous numbers, and some 4.1 million actual fraud incidents. And that corroborates statistics which are put out by Gasser in their Global Status Scams report at the end of last year, which I think put the consumer value of scams at something like almost 11 billion pounds. And we know as well that there's this wider pool of activity, be it industry collaboration, in which there is some real progress being made, and we are proud to stand at the centre of that. But increasing government activity, government's been clear that tackling fraud is a priority as a driver of growth, but also regulatory intervention, be it from Ofcom in the form of the enforcement of the Online Safety Act and recent provisions in relation to harmful content as well. But for us, it's always about ID fraud, isn't it? ID fraud sits at the center of this data. It dominates this data. So, I mean, a bit of a multi-part question from me to you to start with this. What are the key themes that we're seeing in relation to ID fraud? And what are the driver of some of those trends?
Yeah, well, as you say, ID fraud continues to be the dominant feature for Cifas. It accounts for 55% of all the filings and is by far the largest category. I mean, in some ways, it's no surprise. Identity fraud is the key enabler, it's the gateway activity that facilitates access to products and services with those compromised or synthetic identities. It facilitates access to individuals' accounts through account takeover as well. So it's absolutely the key thing for us to be focused on. And even UK Finance identified this as one of their most common fraud types, and it's a growing stress for fraud teams. In terms of the sort of looking at the data in a bit more detail and the intelligence underneath, that we're seeing that certainly bank account and plastic card identity fraud has risen. It's now up to 63% of all identity fraud filings. That's up from 59% in 2024. But quite dramatically, telco ID frauds has fallen by 40% from 21,000 to 12,500 cases. Now, this might be that we're seeing there a reflection of a pivot towards that facility takeover and obviously SIM swap enabled fraud rather than a sort of true decline as such. Fraudsters will often pivot between identity fraud and account takeover based on the defences. I think Duncan mentioned that we're also seeing sort of increases across some of the other sectors. Gambling, insurance and public sector saw spikes. In identity fraud, it was up, insurance identity fraud was up by 25%, and the intelligence there is suggesting that it's an increase in genuine policyholders are having their identity stolen and used for policy inception, where they're then adding named drivers and vehicles to the policy which are linked to addresses which are legitimate addresses and where genuine people have got no idea about the insurance policy has been taken out. But in terms of what's driving the activity, well, it goes without saying that AI is in the mix. Certainly the sort of shift to online onboarding and app-based services now that are wide spanning has created vulnerabilities and made it easier for fraudsters to gain access to individuals' accounts. Data breaches continue to provide a significant rich harvest that fuel fraud. Obviously, having somebody's identities, that personal identity is a high value commodity. And AI's ability to generate documents, create phishing emails, and support the creation in fast time of synthetic identities, obviously turbocharging the activity. We're even seeing now examples of AI being used to try and defeat liveness checks, so layering of images of the threat actor over the top of the genuine individual in order to try and overcome those as well. So all the members are continuing to report growing concerns around synthetic ID fraud, and obviously that being enabled by AI. Another thing that we're seeing as well is the targeting of younger victims. So our data suggests that there's been a decrease in victims aged between sort of 31 to 40. That's down 10%, but an increase in younger individuals. So 21 to 30-year-olds, we've seen an increase certainly in plastic card sector of 17%, particularly personal credit card fraud as well. So we suspect that may well be linked to social media behaviour and perhaps lower security awareness and oversharing of data. Some of these things are quite well-known behaviours, and obviously that then leads to targeted phishing and other scams. So there is ongoing risks for younger people, and it's worth noting that from our research, we know that 48% of 18 to 24-year-olds will share identity documents online. So yeah.
There's so much there, isn't there? And quite alarming, some of those trends as well. Shall we move on to a question that we've had in the chat, but also relates, I think, to an issue that's of huge interest to everyone, which is the changes in the muling stats. So I think Duncan suggested earlier that we're seeing an increase in misuse facility filings, but also a decrease in money muling filings. So what do we think is going on there? And what can we say, given the interest that many of our members, and indeed many of the people on the call, have on this?
Yeah, so certainly there's been a significant increase in misuse of facility overall. 35%, I think Duncan referenced earlier, compared to the same period in 2024. There's been certainly a huge increase around refund abuse, payment evasion, and other misuse types. These mainly relate to bank accounts and personal credit cards, and members are suggesting to us that they're seeing applications for loans and assets and credit cards that are made without any genuine intentions to repay. What is interesting from that, though, is that we're starting to see lots more claims of people claiming that they're being victims of impersonation, or that they're being coerced into taking out the product. And that's an interesting area that we're sort of keen to develop further. And the intelligence team will be holding a sort of workshop on that activity in September. So to understand a bit more about what's driving that activity. When it comes to money muling, absolutely, we've seen a decrease of 17% year on year compared to 2024. So in terms of understanding why that's the case, well, we certainly know that this is not a true representation of the scale of money laundering. The FCA report that was published last year identified that only 37% of identified money mules were being reported to the NFT. Now, one of the reasons for the reticence may be where there's very genuine concerns around criminalising some vulnerable individuals, which is leading to some caution amongst some organisations when filing money mules, particularly when they involve young people. I mean, and that is possibly reflected in the numbers as well, because when we look at people under the age of 21 who've been filed, there was a drop of 5% in those compared to 2024. We know that from intelligence that threat actors will target students and young people for this activity, making them think it's a quick get-rich-quick scheme and there's limited risk. We also know that threat actors are coaching individuals, which in turn is making it much more difficult to prove complicity. There is obviously, with all filing to the NFT, a required standard of proof, and obviously if individuals are being coached to avoid those awkward questions, and that's going to make it more difficult for members anyway. We're very well aware of this as an issue and a challenge, and we're looking to work with members on this. We've also introduced a new simplified filing classification. Duncan mentioned that earlier, and that's going to help us understand perhaps in more intimate detail that sort of where this activity is going on. So this is definitely something for us to monitor and keep an eye on. But we do know that social media continues to be a major recruitment tool for money launderers. But we're also seeing now individuals complicit in selling access to their accounts or their identities to organised criminals, and providing that identity documentation for those criminals to open new facilities to sort of abuse those products and services. So it's really important that organisations implement very good, strong, proactive controls. because threat actors, as organisations do that, will look to open accounts using those details in full or as part of synthetic identities to help them get past those controls, I think.
Stephen, thank you so much. I mean, there's so much detail in there. I'm sure we'll have further questions on that, and we do have very significant numbers of questions coming in through the ask a question function. I'm going to move on to account takeover in a second because there are some extraordinary trends there within the numbers, particularly in relation to telecoms. But there's a question that's come up in relation to the Online Safety Act that touches on the issue that we were just speaking to around social media and advertising. And it's whether we as an organization have a view as to whether terms of the Online Safety Act are going to actually have an impact on fraudulent advertising. I think my view from a policy perspective, and I'll be interested to have yours in a second, is that the Online Safety Act implementation is an iterative process. It started off with a series of identified harms. We know that Ofcom have now, I think, currently 11 live investigations open for lack of compliance with the terms of the Act. There are new rules and regulations which have just come into force in relation to age verification around particularly harmful content, and future phases will deal with online advertising. And I understand that Ofcom is about to announce a program of work in relation to this over the course of the autumn. So I think the answer is there are changes. We definitely see much greater engagement in terms of collaborative working from big tech, social media platforms in trying to identify fraudulent content on their platforms, and new requirements will bear down on that further. Is that a fair outline? There's obviously a lot more work to be done, but does
Yeah.
that chime with your view?
I think, yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think it's absolutely a step in the right direction. It's making it more difficult to access the content. Doesn't make it impossible. There's already been stories about the uptick in VPN purchases in order to avoid the age verification checks on access. But it is absolutely a step in the right direction. It's very early doors to sort of really sort of see what that's going to do in terms of impact. But it's absolutely a step in the right direction, making it more difficult to access that sort of content.
Thanks very much. So let's move on to account takeover. And what are we seeing there?
So I think we've seen a modest increase of 1%, but that really does hide under a significant shift in terms of the sector targeting. So online account takeover, online retail account takeover, should I say, has dropped dramatically, 62%. Now that may be reporting behaviour, but also it could be as a result of improved fraud detection rules that some of our members have employed. But we've seen that attackers appear to be pivoting towards telcos and banking. So in banking in particular, there's been an increase in the loans products for account takeovers. Again, that may be linked to some of this intel that we're receiving about impersonations and coercion. But that's definitely seen an increase. But by far the largest driving factor is certainly the targeting of telecoms using sort of spoofed calls and emails to impersonate trusted brands. We've been involved in a national scam that's been going on, sometimes referred to as mobile phone dealer fraud, and that involves the hijacking of a victim's mobile phone account. They're then encouraged to upgrade their phone. A phone is delivered to them. It turns out to be the wrong one. And then the phone is then redirected by the threat actor to a mailing address. Now, we've had upwards of 19,000 of these cases filed to the NFD so far this year. So a significant number when you consider a handset is in the region of around £1,000 per handset. So that's a significant issue. It's national and international, but we're getting some good sort of success working with mobile network operators, Royal Mail and law enforcement to disrupt that activity. But that's been driving, as I say, significant numbers and increases in the telco sector, surged by, as Duncan said, 73%, and now makes up 69% of all account takeover cases.
That's really interesting. Thanks so much, Stephen. Is there anything we can say at this moment about victim demographics? Are any particular trends there?
Yeah, our intelligence suggests that older victims are becoming more increasingly targeted as well. That may be a factor in some of that mobile phone dealer fraud that I was talking about. But victims aged 61 plus now account for 32% of all account takeover cases. That's up from 25% in 2024. And it also is also worth mentioning as well that despite I said there was a reduction in online retail cases, online channels still remain the most significant entry point. 68% of all of our account takeover cases that were filed were facilitated through online methods, compared to 65 in 2024. So it remains a constant theme.
And should we move now on to application fraud?
Yeah.
What is it that you want to tell us there? What are the key themes that might be of interest to our audience?
Well, there's been a decrease there, 25% decrease compared to the same period in 2024. Although that should be borne in mind against there was a significant uptick in 2024, 10% increase. It's difficult to be sure about the true cause of this. It may reflect a change in fraud tactics, with some being put off by increased controls. It also might be reporting behaviour by members. I mean, despite the reduction, research continues to underscore the growing social acceptance of first-party fraud. In the surveys that we've done, individuals are saying it's reasonable to commit this type of fraud. With members continue to report issues of inflated incomes, staged incomes, or false documents, and the ease of obtaining high quality documents, as we talked about with artificial intelligence, is making it harder to detect. So it's it continues to be an enduring threat of seemingly legitimate websites offering fake documents that can be then used to support applications, and their increasing quality and growing availability obviously is a cause for concern for members. So our intelligence also suggests that there's continued issues with professional enablers, potentially sort of rogue solicitors or unregulated brokers who may be facilitating fraudulent applications or directly providing false documents. So this sort of threat of professional enablers suggests that there's more that we can do in terms of coordinated intelligence sharing across sectors to sort of detect specific commonalities around that activity, and that's something we're looking to do as to develop as part of the new Intel service. So long and short is that first party fraud, although it's down, has not gone away. Application fraud, while it's down, has not gone away. Continued investment in upstream prevention controls is pretty essential to keep that low, and that obviously means things like document verification, behavioural biometrics, and obviously fraud database checks, such as checking with NFD.
So let's move on to the insider threat. There's always real interest in this, a threat posed by employees to the organisations that they work for. And we've even had a question directly on this, saying, can local authorities report incidents and view the Cifas database, particularly in relation to polygamous working? And the answer to that is yes, do contact us and we can enable that. But what trends are we seeing there?
Well, volumes obviously on the insider threat database are low compared to what we see on the national fraud database. But whilst they are low, insider threat continues to pose a significant issue reputationally, financially, as well as also all sorts of operational risks. So it remains a persistent and, dare I say, underreported risk. As in previous years, most of the filings we're seeing relate to employment application fraud, so falsification of qualifications or experience, or concealing criminal history, or dishonest action by staff, so manipulating systems, selling data, or improper use of customers' or colleagues' data as well. So fraudulent job applications actually continues to be the top filing for the insider threat database. So and there's also, from an intelligence perspective, continued reference to polygamous working. You just touched on it a moment ago, and the use of reference houses, sort of professional reference houses that are creating false career histories or false CVs as well, which is making it difficult for employers, as well as the ongoing threat of organised criminal gangs placing individuals who work with it, who are part of that OCG, into employers as well.
And I think it's worth noting at that point, isn't it? These are absolute trends that we're seeing in our insider threat database that are being replicated elsewhere, both in our learning survey of fraud managers, but also the behaviours work that we do in societal attitudes to fraud more generally. So although the level of filings is relatively low, and I think that reflects its specialist nature,
Yeah.
actually this is a real and significant issue. We've got about 10 minutes left, and we'll try and answer as many of the questions that have been put in the chat as possible. And Duncan has very kindly rejoined us for this. Um, just in answer to one question, these are findings that relate to the UK and the UK alone. Um, but a bit more of a specialist question, are we seeing any trends in relation to no intent to pay and that population that can be seen at the onboarding stage? I don't know, Stephen, if you want to have first pop at that and then pass to Duncan, or whether
Yeah,
Duncan is
I
closer
think
to that.
our intelligence is reflective of that. We've seen a bit of an uptick there. I think more significantly, we're seeing potentially coaching of individuals when challenged around that activity. So, as I say, coercion is an interesting area that we think is developing and something we're sort of looking to monitor. We'll be running a workshop on that in September. And that obviously directly links to individuals who are taking out products and services with no intent to pay.
And just hopefully, sorry, Duncan.
I was going to say, certainly agree. We've obviously seen the rise in misuse facility and evasion of payments, so sometimes we're seeing the end situation of that. But yeah, particularly around asset finance and loan sector, and more intelligence reporting around no intention to pay, combined with the filing. So certainly would agree with that.
And hopefully a relatively quick question to answer. It's definitional, and it is unexplained conduct against transactions. What does that mean? And can we unpack some of our
I'm
Cifas
gonna
jargon
pass
for
that
the
one
audience?
to Duncan.
So some of it will be the money muling elements, sort of linked to the older filing reasons. Obviously, we've got the new one coming in, but obviously a lot of it will be, the range of scenarios where individuals are letting fraudulent funds pass through their account or even giving up their personal bank account details. So yeah, quite a specific filing reason, but can involve a number of scenarios. And as we see the new mule filing reason play out, that will give us a bit more distinction between the two, I expect.
Thanks so much, Duncan. And we'll move now from, I think, analysis of data to some opinion. So, Stephen, you spoke at some length around ID fraud, but the question is, what are the best ways to combat it? What should firms be doing, in your view? Keeping in mind, this is your view, not the corporate view.
I think there's an absolute need to invest in AI technologies that can help companies detect sort of AI-enabled document validation and of image manipulation as well. So I think anyone that's not considering those things and not actively working to all those things is putting themselves at significant risk. I mean, firms do an immense amount of work sort of to validate and check documents and the genuine status of individuals anyway. So continued vigilance and continued investment in new technologies, I think, is the answer to that. And obviously, NFD provides a significant resource, nearly 2 million cases in the NFD, not all of them ID fraud related, but a significant proportion are. So, yeah, I think that's where I would be: continued investment, continued vigilance.
And there's a theme there that I might pick up in a second in relation to another question. But Duncan, views from you on bad.
Yeah, certainly going back to the basics around encouraging customers to protect their data as much as possible. And I know a lot of organizations are doing a lot more around protecting their brand. I know that came up in the questions around brand spoofing, which talks to the AI point and sort of brand impersonation. So, but technology certainly around detecting documents, etc.
And then inevitably, we have a question around how can we prepare for the increased use of AI by threat actors? And I think as an organization, we're obviously investing significantly in AI. We have an AI transformation underway to make our own services and ability to detect fraud that much more efficient. But this is something that's going to require really intense industry collaboration because it's only through the sharing of data at scale, both nationally between sectors and between firms, but also internationally across key jurisdictions that we're really going to get ahead of the fraudsters, given that AI is just
Yeah.
accelerating their capacity and capability to act.
And I think that's the key to that is being plugged into the infrastructure or the the landscape of what is going on, what is available, what technologies are being developed. So I think that's the key to it is being plugged in. So you know what's going on, you know what is out there potentially. I mean, there's lots of positive news stories about AI in terms of how that's improving efficiencies, making it easier to detect issues, handle large data sets at scale, so that you can identify where you need to be focusing your sort of fraud prevention resources, as well. And also the advent of the scam bots, which are going out there actually targeting scammers and trying to get really useful information and intelligence out of those. And we're obviously doing a lot of work. We're looking at how we can exploit that information and intelligence in the future.
Thanks so much. Question that almost feels planted because it enables us to move seamlessly to advertorial. But has there been any consideration given to enabling Cifas filings that would alert other lenders to individuals who are repeat victims of scams? At present, there are no scam-specific filing options available. Stephen Q, APP victim check.
Yeah, so we've obviously developed. I'm not an expert in APP victim check, but we've developed a new database. We've got members filing to that database, and it is the authorized push payment for victim check database. So it's intended to be, as the label suggests on the tin, a database where members can file those that have been the victims of scams, on the understanding that that's not a barrier to them being joining an organisation or taking out an organisation's products and services. So you can't use it as a front-end screening tool. It sits in the background, but once you've onboarded somebody, you can check against the victim check database to see if they are potentially vulnerable. And if you identify somebody on your books that's been the victim of a scam, then you can obviously build a suitable, appropriate controls around that individual to make sure that they're not going to be a victim again. Because we know, absolutely know for certainty, that there are repeat victims, and numbers of individuals who have been scammed once will then get scammed again. So it's absolutely a vital sort of service that we can provide there.
Thank you very much. A question here on, do you think the failure to prevent legislation will impact on future Cifas inside of threat database filings when it's brought in from the 25th of September this month? I think the easy answer to that is yes, but the question is whether that increase will be material or substantive. It will only become apparent with time.
Yeah, difficult to answer that one. It's likely to have anything that all the new legislation that's coming in is improving our ability to detect this activity, improving our ability to share information and intelligence. So I've no doubt that this is another one of those drivers that will improve that.
Another question here, and we've only got about 2 minutes left, so we'll try and crack through two more. What action do you think we can take regarding claims of coercion, and how could or should these be filed?
Really interesting. It's a topic of conversation internally in terms of how those things can be filed. And I think one of the answer to that question may come as a result of the workshop we're going to run in September. So we're looking to invite those that are really interested in the topic and can make an active contribution to that, with a view to then generating a threat assessment out the back of it. So yeah, watch this space would be my answer.
And I think one final question in the time we have remaining, and it's in relation to investment scam MOs, and it's how can these be reported to us, given that the application for credit potentially in that case, or for whatever is funding the investment, would have been genuinely applied for by the victim?
Well, we're not tracking investment scams as a fraud category, so we'll see the outcomes of them through the money mule reporting and misuse of facility. So when the money's been extracted from the victim, and obviously it's then passing through various accounts to be accessed by the fraudsters. Duncan, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this one.
No, yeah, generally see the end product again with the perhaps misuse of facility angle. Obviously we've got the Cifas intelligence service, so where we see key intelligence relating to investment scams and entities related to it, we could obviously explore that and potentially get that shared out as part of the newly launched Intel service. So yeah, kind of a after case by case basis to look at those. But yeah, certainly a key fraud type that's not going anywhere.
Fantastic. So, Stephen, final lines to you. Any key takeaways that you want our audience to leave with?
Well, I think, at the start you said fraud now accounts for between 41 and 43% of all crime. Cifas data shows filings are a record high for mid-year, and on for a bumper year again compared to last year, which was the highest ever. So, and that's in line with the trends we're seeing from UK Finance, from the Office of National Statistics. So the need for continued data sharing to improve our understanding of threats could not be clearer. So, it's very important for members to continue to file those cases. AI is fueling both fraud and prevention as well. So continued investment, as I said, in systems, continued investment in systems to keep it one step ahead, robust filing of cases into the NFT, cross-sector collaboration. All these things are vital if we want to get ahead of the evolving threats that we're seeing at the moment.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you, Duncan, and thank you, Richard. My thanks to all of you for attending this morning. I hope you found it useful. We will endeavour to get some of your answers to questions put in the chat that we haven't been able to answer to you in writing. Once again, thank you for your time. We wish you a very good morning.
Good morning.
All best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.